Thank you for watching this video about one of America's most perplexing cold cases. Before we dive in, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop it in the comments below, and let's connect through this dark journey together. The story I'm about to tell you spans nearly 4 decades and contains a truth so disturbing that many wished it had remained buried alongside a stretch of America's busiest highway. On the night of November 12, 1986, Pennsylvania State Trooper James Harrison, a respected 34-year-old officer with 8 years of exemplary service, radioed in a routine traffic stop on Interstate 95, approximately 30 miles north of Philadelphia. He reported pulling over a blue semi-truck with main plates for erratic driving at 11:42 p.m. That was the last anyone ever heard from Trooper Harrison. His patrol car, a white and blue 1984 Dodge Diplomat, disappeared along with him. Despite one of the largest searches in Pennsylvania law enforcement history, no trace of Harrison, his vehicle, or the mysterious truck driver was found. For 38 years, the case remained an unsolved mystery, a painful void for his family and colleagues. Then, in April 2024, a long-haul trucker named Charlie Donovan made a discovery in an abandoned storage facility that would finally begin to unravel the truth about what happened that cold November night. What he found inside a rusted patrol car hidden beneath decades of dust and debris would not only solve the disappearance, but expose a dark secret that had been traveling America's highways for years before and after Trooper Harrison vanished. James Harrison was the embodiment of the American dream in the early 1980s. Born and raised in the small town of Oakville, Pennsylvania, he was the son of a steel worker who had instilled in him a deep sense of duty and community service. By all accounts, Jim was a devoted husband to Susan, his high school sweetheart, and a loving father to their 5-year-old daughter, Emily. The Harrisons had just purchased their first home, a modest 3-bedroom colonial on Maple Street, where Susan tended a garden that was the envy of the neighborhood. In the summer of 1986, they had taken a family vacation to Virginia Beach, their first real vacation since Emily was born. The photos from that trip, later displayed at his memorial service, showed a man with kind eyes and an easy smile, his arms protectively around his family, as waves crashed behind them. Jim's colleagues at Troop K described him as methodical, fair, and detail-oriented. Unlike some of his more hardened peers, Harrison maintained a genuine belief that most people were good at heart. This outlook made him popular among the communities he served along the I-95 corridor. He wasn't looking to meet a quota or throw his weight around, recalled his former partner, Officer Thomas Webb. Jim was the kind of trooper who might let you off with a warning if you were honest with him, but he had an uncanny ability to spot when something wasn't right. This intuition had led to several significant arrests, including a drug trafficking bust in early 1986 that earned him a commendation. What few people knew was that Harrison had recently begun investigating a pattern of disappearances along interstate highways in the Northeast. In his personal notebook found years later, he had mapped out locations where young women had vanished between 1983 and 1986. The official investigations had attributed these to runaways or unrelated incidents, but Harrison saw connections no one else had noticed. Sometimes I think these highways hide secrets better than any forest or ocean ever could, he wrote in an entry dated just 3 weeks before he disappeared. All that movement, all those strangers passing through, who notices when someone doesn't make it to their destination? November 12, 1986 began as an ordinary day for Trooper Harrison. The weather forecast predicted the first real cold snap of the season, with temperatures expected to drop below freezing overnight. Jim kissed Susan goodbye at 2:30 p.m. before his evening shift, promising to help Emily with her kindergarten project the next morning. "Be safe out there," Susan told him, their routine parting words. He smiled and replied, as he always did, "Always am." Harrison's shift was quiet for the first several hours. The evening traffic thinned as the temperature dropped, and a light fog began to form over stretches of the interstate. At 10:17 p.m., he issued a citation to a college student for speeding. At 11:05 p.m., he helped a stranded motorist change a flat tire. Both interactions were documented in his official log and confirmed by the individuals involved. The night shift dispatcher, Marion Kolchak, later recalled that Harrison seemed in good spirits during their brief radio exchanges. At 11:42 p.m., Harrison's voice came over the radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I'm initiating a traffic stop at mile marker 223 northbound. Blue Peterbilt with Maine plates. Driver appears to be operating erratically. Running the plates now." Kolchak acknowledged the call and waited for the follow-up that typically came within minutes. 10 minutes passed with no update. At 11:54 p.m., Kolchak radioed Harrison but received no response. By midnight, following protocol, she dispatched the nearest available unit to check on Harrison. Officer Raymond Diaz arrived at mile marker 223 at 12:22 a.m. There was no sign of Harrison's patrol car or the truck he had reported stopping. Diaz drove several miles in both directions, scanning the shoulders and nearby access roads, but found nothing. At 12:45 a.m., the Pennsylvania State Police officially classified James Harrison as missing and began mobilizing search teams. The quiet November night erupted into activity as police cruisers, helicopters with searchlights, and K-9 units descended on the stretch of I-95 where Harrison was last known to be. By dawn, the search had expanded to cover a 50-mile radius, but the only evidence recovered was Harrison's final radio transmission. Both he and his patrol car had vanished without a trace. As morning broke on November 13, 1986, Susan Harrison awoke to pounding on her front door. Two solemn-faced state troopers stood on her porch, and she knew immediately something was terribly wrong. "We haven't found anything yet," they assured her, but the words provided little comfort. Within hours, the Harrison home became the unofficial headquarters for the search effort, with neighbors bringing food and offering to watch Emily as Susan coordinated with law enforcement from her living room. The initial search focused on the wooded areas and waterways near where Harrison had last radioed in. Investigators theorized that Harrison might have followed the truck off the interstate, perhaps onto one of the service roads or into an industrial area. The first 48 hours produced no results, despite hundreds of officers and volunteers combing the terrain. The truck became the focus of the investigation. The main license plate number Harrison had begun to relay was partial, matching 17 possible vehicles. Each was tracked down, but none showed any connection to the disappearance. Roadblocks were established on I-95 and connecting highways, with officers showing Harrison's photo to travelers, but no credible sightings emerged. 5 days into the search, a potential breakthrough came when a gas station attendant in Delaware reported seeing a state trooper matching Harrison's description early on November 13th. Security footage was too grainy to confirm the identification, and the lead ultimately went nowhere. Rumors began to circulate. Some suggested Harrison had staged his own disappearance, pointing to the timing just before his shift ended, and the complete absence of evidence. Others whispered about possible connections to organized crime or drug trafficking along the I-95 corridor. Detective Mark Ramirez, assigned as lead investigator, dismissed these theories. "There's nothing in Harrison's background or finances to suggest anything but a dedicated officer who became the victim of foul play," he stated at a press conference 2 weeks after the disappearance. The FBI joined the investigation, creating a profile of the potential perpetrator, likely a male with a criminal history, possibly someone Harrison had encountered previously in his law enforcement career. They scrutinized recent arrests and releases, parolees in the area, and individuals who had made threats against law enforcement. None of these avenues led to Harrison. By Christmas 1986, the active search was scaled back. Susan Harrison faced her first holiday season as a single mother with a daughter who couldn't understand why her father hadn't come home. Years passed, and the absence of Trooper James Harrison carved a permanent void in the lives of those who loved him. Susan Harrison never remarried, devoted instead to raising Emily and preserving Jim's memory. She established a scholarship fund in his name for children of law enforcement officers and became an advocate for families of missing persons. The Harrison home on Maple Street remained largely unchanged, Jim's study preserved like a time capsule from 1986. "I always believed he would walk through that door again," Susan confided in a 2006 interview. "After 20 years, I still leave the porch light on every night." The stretch of I-95 where Harrison disappeared became known locally as Trooper's Mile. A small memorial marker was placed at the rest stop nearest to mile marker 223, where fellow officers would occasionally leave flowers or police badges. In 1993, 7 years after his disappearance, James Harrison was officially declared dead. The ceremony at Oakville Cemetery featured a full police honor guard, though there was no body to bury. Emily, then 12, placed her father's hat on the empty casket. Detective Ramirez never fully abandoned the case, even after his retirement in 2001. He kept a file box in his home office, periodically reviewing the evidence and following up on occasional tips that inevitably led nowhere. "Some cases get under your skin," he told a documentary filmmaker in 2011. "This one became part of my DNA." The blue Peterbilt truck became something of a legend among state troopers in the Northeast, a ghost story passed down to rookies. Occasionally, reports would surface of a similar vehicle being spotted under suspicious circumstances, but these incidents were never connected to Harrison's case. By the 2010s, the disappearance of Trooper Harrison had faded from public consciousness, becoming just another cold case in police archives. The construction of new sections of I-95 and the modernization of the highway eventually altered the landscape, where Harrison had vanished, erasing whatever physical evidence might have remained. Technology advanced, bringing digital databases, improved forensics, and communication systems that might have prevented Harrison's fate had they existed in 1986. But these advances came too late for James Harrison. His case file, once active and urgent, gathered dust in Pennsylvania State Police headquarters, occasionally reviewed by new detectives who invariably reached the same dead ends their predecessors had encountered. While the world moved on without him, Trooper James Harrison experienced a very different reality. After pulling over the blue Peterbilt that foggy November night, Harrison approached the driver's side with standard caution, flashlight in hand. The truck driver, a man who identified himself as Robert Mercer, appeared cooperative, handing over his license and registration with a practiced ease that momentarily disarmed Harrison. As the trooper returned to his patrol car to run the information, something caught his attention, a discrepancy in the cargo manifest that triggered his investigative instincts. Harrison radioed in the traffic stop, but decided to look more closely before requesting backup. This decision sealed his fate. When Harrison approached the truck a second time, questioning the manifest discrepancy, Mercer's demeanor changed instantly. Before Harrison could react, Mercer had produced a concealed taser, incapacitating the officer with 50,000 volts. In the secluded darkness of mile marker 223, with the fog providing a natural screen, Mercer worked quickly. He dragged the semi-conscious trooper into the truck's sleeper cabin, bound him with duct tape, and then drove both vehicles off the interstate to an abandoned farm access road 2 miles away. There, he transferred Harrison to the cargo area of his truck, hidden behind a false wall he had constructed for precisely this purpose. Harrison regained full consciousness to find himself in near total darkness, the rumble of the truck's engine telling him they were moving. Hours passed as the truck continued north, crossing state lines. Harrison, trained for crisis situations, attempted to maintain his composure, working methodically to free himself from his restraints. The confined space made movement difficult, and each attempt produced only minimal progress. Mercer stopped periodically, and during these breaks, Harrison could hear the truck driver moving around the cab, sometimes talking to himself in a calm, almost soothing voice that contrasted horrifically with the situation. At one point, Harrison heard Mercer say clearly, "You're not the first lawman who got too curious, and you won't be the last." By Harrison's estimation, they drove for nearly 20 hours, though with no view of the outside world, he couldn't be certain. The truck finally came to a stop, and Harrison heard the sounds of large doors opening, then closing, a garage or warehouse. When Mercer finally opened the hidden compartment, Harrison was momentarily blinded by the sudden light. He found himself in a large, empty warehouse with concrete floors and metal walls. Mercer was not alone. Another man, taller and heavier, stood nearby regarding Harrison with clinical detachment. "This one's a state trooper," Mercer explained. "Found my special collection. Couldn't leave him on the road." The other man nodded grimly. "You know what happens now." What followed was a week of captivity in a small, windowless room within the warehouse. Harrison, despite his training and resolve, faced a calculated cruelty designed to break him physically and mentally. Yet, through it all, he maintained a clear mind, gathering information, memorizing voices and routines, searching for any opportunity to escape or leave evidence of his presence. Charlie Donovan had been driving trucks for over 20 years, mostly along the eastern seaboard routes. At 52, with a salt and pepper beard and perpetually tired eyes, he had seen nearly everything the American highway system had to offer. In April 2024, a mechanical issue with his rig forced him to pull over near an exit in southern New Jersey. While waiting for roadside assistance, he decided to explore what appeared to be an abandoned storage facility visible from the elevated highway. The property, overgrown and partially collapsed in sections, had clearly been vacant for years. Donovan later claimed he was simply looking for a place to stretch his legs and maybe find a bathroom, but his curiosity led him deeper into the facility than he intended. In the back section of the largest warehouse, behind a wall of collapsed shelving and debris, Donovan spotted something that made him stop short: the distinctive roof lights of a police cruiser, barely visible beneath years of dust and debris. Using the flashlight on his phone, Donovan made his way carefully to the vehicle. It was indeed a police car, an old Dodge Diplomat painted in the blue and white colors of the Pennsylvania State Police. The car was in remarkably good condition considering its age, protected from the elements by the warehouse roof. Layers of dust covered the vehicle, but there was no significant rust or deterioration. Initially thinking he had stumbled upon an abandoned police museum or perhaps a movie prop storage facility, Donovan circled the vehicle. When he wiped dust from the driver's side window, he noticed something that sent a chill through him. The keys were still in the ignition, and a half-filled coffee cup rested in the center console, preserved like an artifact in amber. On the passenger seat lay an open logbook, the last entry dated November 12, 1986. Donovan, a true crime enthusiast who occasionally listened to cold case podcasts during his long hauls, felt the hair on his arms stand up. He remembered a famous case from his younger days, a Pennsylvania trooper who vanished on I-95 in the mid-1980s. Could this possibly be the missing patrol car? Resisting the urge to open the door, Donovan backed away and called 911. "I think I've found something important," he told the dispatcher. "Something that's been missing for a very long time." Within hours of Charlie Donovan's call, the abandoned storage facility transformed into a hive of activity. The New Jersey State Police established a perimeter, and forensic teams from both New Jersey and Pennsylvania arrived to process what was quickly confirmed to be Trooper James Harrison's long-missing patrol car. Emily Harrison, now 42 and working as a criminal psychologist, received a call she had both dreaded and hoped for throughout her adult life. After arranging emergency leave from her position at Quantico, she drove through the night to reach the scene where a piece of her father had finally surfaced. Detective Layla Wright, a cold case specialist with the Pennsylvania State Police, led the evidence recovery team. The patrol car, she realized, was a perfectly preserved time capsule from 1986. It's as if someone parked it here the night Harrison disappeared and simply walked away, she noted in her preliminary report. The vehicle's interior yielded a treasure trove of evidence. Harrison's service weapon remained in its holster beneath the seat, suggesting he had been surprised or overwhelmed quickly. His coffee was still in the cup holder, with lipstick on the rim. Susan had kissed the cup before he left for his shift, a small gesture of affection preserved for nearly 4 decades. Most significantly, investigators discovered something that had been overlooked in the original case files. Harrison had been conducting his own unofficial investigation into disappearances along I-95. Hidden in the vehicle's trunk, secured in a locked metal box, was a detailed notebook containing Harrison's private observations, maps marking disappearance locations, and photocopies of missing persons reports, spanning from 1981 to 1986. Harrison had connected incidents that official investigations had treated as unrelated, identifying a pattern of young women vanishing from rest stops and service areas along the interstate highway system. Each disappearance had occurred within a 2-hour window of a blue Peterbilt semi being logged at nearby way stations or toll plazas. The final page of Harrison's notebook contained a partial license plate number and a hastily written note, "Driver matches composite. Checking main DMV records for R. Mercer." Forensic technicians also made a chilling discovery when they processed the vehicle's exterior. Using specialized lighting, they revealed traces of blood on the driver's side door handle, blood that DNA testing would later confirm belonged to James Harrison. The location and spatter pattern suggested Harrison had been injured or incapacitated while returning to his vehicle, perhaps after initially approaching the truck driver. As Emily Harrison stood outside the police tape, watching investigators in white suits meticulously process her father's car, Detective Wright approached with a small evidence bag. Inside was James Harrison's wedding ring, found wedged between the driver's seat and center console. "He must have removed it," Wright explained gently, "possibly to leave as evidence that he had been there." Emily took the bag with trembling hands, the first tangible piece of her father she had touched since she was 5 years old. Detective Layla Wright, a methodical investigator with 15 years of experience in cold cases, recognized the significance of what they discovered. Harrison's notebook provided the framework for a theory that had never been fully explored in 1986, that the trooper had inadvertently intercepted a serial predator operating along the interstate highway system. With the resources of modern law enforcement at her disposal, Wright began by focusing on the name R. Mercer and the partial Maine license plate Harrison had documented. Cross-referencing with historical DMV records from Maine, she identified 7 Robert or Richard Mercers who had held commercial driving licenses in the early 1980s. 6 were quickly eliminated through background checks and timeline analysis. The 7th, a Robert Allen Mercer, born 1953 in Bangor, Maine, presented an intriguing gap. His documentation disappeared entirely after 1987, as if the man had simply ceased to exist. Wright assembled a task force that included FBI analysts, Interstate Highway Patrol coordinators, and Emily Harrison, whose expertise in criminal psychology proved invaluable. They began mapping missing persons cases along major trucking routes from 1981 through 1990, focusing particularly on disappearances that matched the pattern Harrison had identified. The results were disturbing. 27 cases aligned with their parameters, far more than Harrison had documented. Meanwhile, forensic teams processed the warehouse where the patrol car had been found. The facility had changed ownership multiple times since 1986, eventually being abandoned in 2007 when its parent company declared bankruptcy. Record-keeping had been poor, but they managed to trace the property back to a corporation called Northeastern Storage Solutions, which had leased several units to independent contractors in the 1980s. One such contractor was listed as REA, Mercer Logistics. The breakthrough came when facial recognition software matched a driver's license photo of Robert Mercer to a man named Thomas Blackwood, living in a small town in western Pennsylvania. Blackwood, now 71, had established his identity in 1988 and built a quiet life as the owner of a small trucking company. His vehicle specialized in long-haul deliveries across state lines, and he personally trained all his drivers. More disturbing was the discovery that several young women had disappeared along routes serviced by Blackwood's company over the decades, though no connection had previously been made. Wright prepared for the most important interview of her career, knowing that her approach might determine whether James Harrison's family would finally learn the truth about what happened that November night in 1986. On May 15, 2024, Detective Wright and a team of officers approached Thomas Blackwood's modest home on the outskirts of Harrisville, Pennsylvania. The property sat on 10 isolated acres with a large garage that housed his personal collection of vintage trucks, including a meticulously restored blue Peterbilt. Blackwood, a thin man with calculating eyes that betrayed no emotion, did not seem surprised when officers presented their warrant. "I've been expecting this visit for a long time," he said calmly, as he was escorted to the waiting police vehicle. At the Western Pennsylvania State Police Headquarters, Wright conducted an interview that would later be studied in criminal justice programs nationwide. For the first 3 hours, Blackwood maintained his innocence, claiming mistaken identity and offering alibi information for key dates. Wright methodically dismantled each denial, presenting evidence with surgical precision: the warehouse lease documents, the DNA evidence from the patrol car, and, most damagingly, Harrison's detailed notes about the pattern Blackwood had established. "Trooper Harrison figured you out before anyone else even knew to look," Wright said, sliding the notebook across the table. "He recognized your hunting grounds when no one else connected the dots." Something shifted in Blackwood's demeanor, a mixture of pride and resignation. He was smarter than most, Blackwood admitted, breaking his facade. What followed was a confession that spanned 5 hours and revealed a predator who had used America's highways as both hunting ground and escape route for nearly 40 years. Blackwood had discovered early in his trucking career that the transient nature of interstate commerce provided perfect cover for his crimes. State jurisdictions rarely communicated effectively, and victims chosen carefully, usually young women traveling alone, often without strong family connections, could disappear with minimal investigation. Harrison had been different, a direct threat, who had recognized the pattern. "He saw what no one else saw," Blackwood stated with a hint of admiration. "When I handed him my license that night, I watched his face change. He knew exactly who I was." Blackwood described attacking Harrison as he returned to his patrol car using a stun gun, and then forcing the trooper into his truck. He had driven Harrison to the New Jersey warehouse, which served as a temporary holding location, before taking him to a remote area in the Appalachian Mountains. There, Blackwood claimed, he had eliminated the threat Harrison posed to his freedom. As the confession concluded, Blackwood provided the coordinates for a location in the mountains of central Pennsylvania. "You'll find what's left of your trooper there," he said dispassionately, "and probably a few others who got in my way over the years." On a rainy morning in June 2024, Susan and Emily Harrison stood hand in hand at the edge of a dense forest in central Pennsylvania. Behind them, a procession of law enforcement vehicles stretched down the narrow mountain road, state troopers, FBI agents, and forensic specialists who had spent the past 3 weeks carefully excavating the area identified by Blackwood. The recovery operation had yielded the remains of 9 individuals, including those identified through dental records as Trooper James Harrison. The site, a remote hunting cabin owned by Blackwood under another alias, had served as his disposal ground for those who threatened his activities. For the Harrison women, the discovery brought a complex mixture of grief and relief. "I always knew in my heart that he was gone," Susan said, her voice steady despite her tears. "But there's a difference between knowing and knowing." After 38 years of uncertainty, they could finally bring James home. The case against Thomas Blackwood, formerly Robert Mercer, expanded dramatically in the weeks following his confession. investigators across 12 states collaborated to link him to at least 17 disappearances between 1981 and 2018. His trucking company's routes correlated perfectly with the locations where victims had last been seen. Most disturbing were the journals found hidden in Blackwood's home, documenting his activities in coded language that forensic psychologists were still working to fully decipher. At his arraignment, Blackwood faced the families of his victims for the first time. Emily Harrison, representing both her father and the others who had been silenced, delivered a statement to the court. "My father gave his life trying to stop this man," she said, her voice echoing in the hushed courtroom. His sacrifice wasn't in vain, even if justice came decades too late. Today, we begin to reclaim the memories of those who were taken from us. Blackwood, showing no remorse, was held without bail, pending a trial that prosecutors promised would result in multiple life sentences. The evidence against him was overwhelming, bolstered by his own detailed confession and the physical evidence recovered from both his property and the burial site. For Detective Wright, the case represented both a triumph and a sobering reminder of how predators could exploit the gaps in America's law enforcement systems. If agencies had communicated better in the 1980s, if Harrison's theories had been taken more seriously, countless lives might have been saved, she noted in her final case report. His investigation was decades ahead of its time. Thomas Blackwood's trial began in October 2024, drawing national media attention as one of the most significant serial predator cases in American history. The prosecution presented a methodical case detailing how Blackwood had used the interstate highway system to commit his crimes and evade detection across multiple jurisdictions. The defense, recognizing the overwhelming evidence, focused on portraying Blackwood as mentally ill and therefore not fully responsible for his actions. This strategy collapsed when psychiatric evaluations revealed a calculating individual who had maintained perfect clarity about his choices. After just 6 days of testimony and 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all 18 counts of first-degree murder, including the killing of Trooper James Harrison. The judge, noting the exceptional cruelty and calculation involved, sentenced Blackwood to consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. For the law enforcement community, the case prompted a national review of how interstate crimes were investigated and documented. The Harrison Protocol was established to identify and track potential serial predators operating across state lines, with particular focus on America's highways. The system that Harrison had attempted to create in his notebook was now implemented nationwide, with sophisticated algorithms detecting patterns that might indicate predatory behavior along transit corridors. At the Pennsylvania State Police Training Academy, Harrison's story became required learning for every cadet. His photograph alongside his recovered badge was displayed prominently in the Memorial Hall with the inscription, "He saw what others missed." He gave his life protecting those who never knew they were in danger. For the victims' families, justice brought varied measures of peace. Some expressed frustration that Blackwood would not face execution, while others found closure in knowing that the man responsible for their suffering would spend his remaining years in isolation. The most significant impact, perhaps, came through the establishment of the Harrison Foundation, created by Emily to support both the families of officers killed in the line of duty and the development of improved investigative techniques for cross-jurisdictional crimes. "This isn't just about honoring my father's memory," Emily explained at the Foundation's launch. "It's about creating the system he envisioned, one where predators can't disappear into the gaps between jurisdictions, and where every missing person receives the attention they deserve." On a crisp autumn day in November 2025, exactly 39 years after James Harrison disappeared, hundreds gathered at Oakville Cemetery for a long-delayed funeral service. The trooper's remains, finally recovered from Blackwood's mountain property, were laid to rest with full police honors. Officers from every state lined the pathway to the gravesite, standing at attention as the casket passed. Susan Harrison, now in her 70s, walked slowly behind the casket, supported by Emily on one side and Detective Wright on the other. The bond formed between the three women during the investigation had evolved into a deep friendship, united by their shared journey to uncover the truth. At the graveside, Susan placed her hand on the polished wood. "I kept my promise, Jim," she whispered. "I kept the light on until you came home." Emily, who had followed in her father's footsteps by dedicating her life to justice, placed his recovered notebook beside the casket. "He would have wanted this buried with him," she explained to those nearby. "His work is finished now." In the months following Blackwood's sentencing, the case continued to resonate throughout American law enforcement. The discovery of Harrison's methodical investigation highlighted how close he had come to stopping a predator decades before modern techniques would identify such patterns. Charlie Donovan, the truck driver whose curiosity had finally broken the case, received commendations from both the Pennsylvania and New Jersey State Police. He used his sudden fame to advocate for improved safety measures at highway rest stops and increased awareness among the trucking community about suspicious activities. The old warehouse where Harrison's patrol car had remained hidden for nearly 4 decades was demolished. The land donated to create a memorial park honoring victims of violence. At its center stood a simple stone marker with the names of all those Blackwood had taken, Harrison's name at the top of the list. For Susan Harrison, the resolution brought a chance to finally move forward. After the funeral, she sold the house on Maple Street where she had kept vigil for so long. "Jim isn't in that house anymore," she explained to friends who questioned her decision. "He's at rest now, and so can I be." She moved to be closer to Emily and her family, embracing her role as grandmother with the joy that had been subdued during the long years of uncertainty. On the first anniversary of Blackwood's conviction, Emily Harrison published a book titled The Long Night on I-95, chronicling both her father's disappearance and the decades-long journey to justice. In its conclusion, she reflected on the strange intersections of fate that had finally brought resolution. A mechanical failure that forced a trucker to stop near an abandoned warehouse, a preserved patrol car that held the keys to solving multiple cold cases, and her father's detailed notes that had waited patiently for someone to understand their significance. "Some mysteries aren't meant to remain unsolved," she wrote. "Sometimes the truth finds its way into the light, no matter how long it takes or how deeply it's buried. My father believed that with his whole heart, and in the end, he was right."